Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. We're day two. We got people coming in for breakfast, but we also have people online, so we're going to get going this morning. We are really excited for the next session. It is called Family Strategies for Living with a Genetic Condition, and today we have three amazing speakers. We have Maya Doyle, Haley March, and Dr. Brett Bell. And I'm going to let you go so we don't get behind already.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone who's coming in this morning. Please come down front, chase your friends down front as they walk in, and hi to everyone who's online with us. So let's see if I can get, there we go, this works. I have really formal things about what we're going to do this morning, but you don't need to worry about all of that. We're just going to keep chatting. My hope this morning is to give you lots of ideas that will percolate throughout your day. I will introduce myself and Haley and Brett and I in a moment, and you will see us all over the conference today. We're running a couple different sessions, and we're also around just to chat. So please find us wherever you are. This morning's first session, I'm going to give you a lot of information, and then at 11, if you're of a mind, we will have a more interactive session where we can sit and chat a little bit more about the same topics. So that's our goal for the day. So who am I? I am a pediatric social worker. I have been working in peds since 1992, but I've been working with rare communities with different diseases since about 2000. So, and I worked with the AP folks 2 years ago when they had their first conference in New York City. So it's really exciting to be here now with this bigger community and be getting to know all of you. It's been wonderful. I spent yesterday walking around, chatting with people, eavesdropping a little bit, getting to observe everyone with their kids and sort of see, and their young adults, and sort of see how things are going. So hopefully I can, pull out some things about what I've seen and what I've learned over time that will be useful for all of you. So I'm going to let my colleagues, Haley and Brett, introduce themselves also. I think we have working mics.
Hi, my name is Haley March. I am a social worker who specializes in trauma and crisis intervention. I've previously been a respite provider for children with comorbidities, with genetic disorders and behavioral health conditions, as well as a therapeutic recreation counselor for the same population. My focus is in clinical work, and I attended a conference 4 years ago in Los Angeles.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Bright and early, 7:30 in the morning. My name is Brett Bell. My background is in psychology. I'm currently the COO of Project AP, but before that work, I did clinical work in forensic settings, neuropsychological evaluations, school psychology, did a lot of work in trauma and sexual abuse, and looking forward to hearing from you guys today. I know Maya has a presentation, but it's always really critical that we get the feedback from you about what's working and what's not working. So I know this is a big room, and it's a little bit of a difficult forum to have it virtually in a big ballroom, but questions and your feedback, I think, is really important throughout today. So looking forward to today.
Thanks, guys. All right, so my talk is about strategies for coping and living with rare and genetic diseases and with chronic conditions. And when you say a phrase like that, there are a lot of things that sort of you need to think about how you define for yourselves, right? What does it mean to be successful? What does it mean to live successfully with your child's or young adult's condition? How you define family? Who's your family? Is your family the people who live in your house? Is your family the people who support you back at home? Or is your family the people that are in the room today with you at this conference? And my experience in working with lots of communities is that this becomes family. So I really hope that you are enjoying your family reunion this week. The other thing, which I'll talk about a little bit more, is, and I use the word illness, and I'll explain why I use the word illness in a moment, right? But how we understand what it is that your child and you are living with and coping with, right? And we have to focus on families, right? Very few of us live in a vacuum. I mean, some of us are isolated for sure. This year has been particularly challenging in that way. But for the most part, right, we're functioning as families and taking on the stressors of living with these conditions as families. So I think that my lens at this is really looking at how does this affect families in general? So when I talk about illness and disease, it's really important, I think, to just know where my vocabulary comes from. You may use different terminology in your house. You may use a different way of understanding what you're living with, whether it's 8P or DUP 15Q or Ring 14, or any number of other health conditions, right? You may use different language to describe that. But the way that I've come to think about it, that I think is helpful to kind of think of, is that I use the word disease when I'm thinking about sort of the biological or the genetic entity that we're dealing with. And I use the word illness to think about the social impacts, right? How you perceive yourself, how your child is perceived, how you perceive your child, how other people in your community interact with you, all of those realities of living with whatever the condition is that you're living with. And it then impacts, right, how you think about yourself, how you think about what's it going to be like to go out to the grocery store, what's it going to be like to travel. Many of you have traveled here from all over the country. Like, what is that experience like? And the people you interact with along the way. Something else that we talked about a bunch when I was at the 8P meeting 2 years ago, and I think about a lot, is also this idea of how we think about disability, right? We think about disability from a medical point of view, where what's wrong, what are we treating, what are we addressing, what are we trying to fix or manage? But then there's also a social model of disability, which is really about what are the barriers that get in our way to living our fullest lives, right? What are things that are things accessible? Are things inclusive? How do we make the world more available for our kids and for ourselves and for our families? So, I don't know if you all may have some reflections on like even what the travel was to get here. When we had a meeting in New York 2 years ago, people were talking about just managing public transportation, getting around, and what was easy and what was really challenging about that, when obviously you have folks in specialized strollers and wheelchairs and all kinds of other things, right? How do you manage all of that? So I like to have that out there and thinking about this is what we're managing and living with on a day-to-day basis. And the other piece to think about, and I work in a university now, so I'm training med students and social work students and nursing students and OTs and PTs and all kinds of folks to help think about how they interact with families and how they understand what families are going through, right? Because we need to do work on both sides. We need to understand for ourselves as families, but we also, right, want our healthcare providers to have a better sense of what life is like. And so thinking about all of the sort of particular aspects of what you're living with, right, is it something that is genetic that you expected in your family, or is it something that was de novo and unexpected, right? Was it something that happened out of nowhere, or something that is progressive and ongoing and happening again and again and again? I've talked with a bunch of folks, certainly in this community, right, where you're dealing with seizures, where you're dealing with having to be vigilant, having to be attentive all the time to those worries, right? There are other chronic conditions where it may not be that level of intensity, but yet there's always something in the background. So thinking about how we understand what we're living with. And sort of what's the, what do we understand about what the future may hold? And often we don't know. And that also shapes, right, how we respond. So you might want to think about, right, how things perhaps have shifted in your family, not simply from the moment of when you got your child's diagnosis, or perhaps when you noticed, hey, something's going on that we need to figure out what's happening. And then over time, and I've met lots of folks here who now have teenagers and 20-year-olds, right, that you've been living this life for a while. And you think about where you are in your life developmentally as parents, right, where you are in your relationships, your work, your education, where your kids are in their personal trajectories, both your affected and your unaffected kids, right? So what are the things that are going on in your particular lives that maybe are shaping this track, and there is no one way to do it. Right? What a family over here experiences may be totally different from what a family over here experiences. And there is no one right way. But I've certainly come across in talking to families over time, some things that seem to kind of consistently help people and provide some structure for folks in how they're coping and managing with their child. There are lots of things, right, that are unexpected and unpredictable along the way. And there are things that we do to kind of bring some sense and management to that. You know, it is often, especially with rare conditions like these, right, you may not meet other people who know what you're like. What was it like walking? Is there anybody here who's here for the first time at a conference? I know you won't be able to, I know I'll barely be able to hear you, but what was it like walking into the room? What was it like getting here? Challenging and exciting, right? So it's a little bit of both. Thank you. Right, so that's really, you know, if you're out in the world and making your way and no one else really knows what that diagnosis means or what the realities of that mean, right? It's a whole extra layer of things to negotiate. And then I always like to ask people about their typical day. Does anybody here have a typical day? No, not so much really. There are unexpected things every day often. And so kind of figuring out philosophically how you're going to manage that, right? Do you just kind of ride it out? I go where the day takes me. I see what happens. Other folks are much better at sort of saying, okay, I'm going to structure our week, our day, our life in a certain way to kind of give us as much balance as we can. And again, there's no right answer to doing that. I threw this slide in. I'm not going to show the video, but you will have it out there. The PDF is in your agenda if you want to download it and grab it. It's a really beautiful video that I fell in love with from someone who actually did a dissertation about parenting children with disabilities and what those different interactions are like and how those things may be different. Because, right, your parenting experience with your affected child may be quite different than what you're seeing from peers and family members, and being able to be with each other and kind of have that piece of understanding what that dance is like and how your interactions with your child may be quite different, but yet your communication and the style that you find that works for you all is quite powerful. Right. So I just think it's helpful to remember and sort of see that. And it's a beautiful, calming, like 10-minute video. When you have time to watch it, I highly recommend. So these are some things that have come up in work that I've done with families over the last decade or so, talking to folks who are living with rare and chronic conditions with all sorts of different medical aspects and psychosocial aspects as well. But these were sort of chunks that I have seen folks talk about as the things that sort of help them, right? And we'll kind of walk through them in more detail, but probably we could just stop here and you could kind of look at what are the things that make the most sense, right? Educating, getting knowledgeable yourself, getting the people around you as knowledgeable as they can be about what's going on with your child, figuring out the structures and regimens that work in your daily lives to make sure that your kids are as healthy and safe and well managed as they can be and making progress as they can be. Thinking about, right, all the things you do to help your kids reach each goal that they can, and that may be very different for any given child, right? But thinking about both what you have to sort of push and where you have to protect them, where you have to protect your family, where you have to manage working with systems that sometimes are not so easy, thinking about healthcare and education particularly. Connecting to each other, sharing your stories, and kind of figuring out that sort of philosophical piece of how are we going to understand this as our lives move forward, right? How are we going to understand this impact on our families? As we're going through this, if there are things that resonate for you, I'm going to ask you to do two things. One, feel free to put things in the chat so that we can see it. And two, we're doing another session at 11 o'clock, which will be in a smaller room where we can talk more directly. So please come and talk with us more as we get through the morning. So I'm assuming I have families in the room all across the spectrum from fairly newly, who are my fairly newly diagnosed people? Right? And then who are my veterans who've been doing this for a while? All right, so we have a mix here, right, of sort of where you are and what you've gotten to know, and how you've taken in information. And you've probably figured out, right, as you talk to different medical providers, as you talk to different therapists, right, how you take in that information and give it back again, right? So how do you make sure that you're understanding all of the fine points? And I know I sat in many of the sessions yesterday and in past conferences, right? Thinking about the genetics, thinking about the healthcare implications, thinking about all the systems you have to be able to interact with. And how do you take that in? How do you make sure that you're hearing the same information? And how do you ask more questions? Because if you're not getting answers, to me, this is key. If you're not getting an answer, that's the key to your advocacy. Right? What's missing? What's missing for our diagnosis? What's missing for this group of diagnoses? What do we need to do? Right? The more that you know, the more you can ask those questions, the more that you can push those envelopes. And it's amazing what you understand as parents. I've worked in the hospitals for 30 years, and I am always amazed. Families, how much we have to respect families for what they come to know by living day in and day out with whatever condition they're living with. I live with a chronic health condition too. So I'm like, I know what my day-to-day is like that my medical team may not really get. And knowing that and knowing the power that you have with that, I think is so important. And sometimes it's hard because you may not feel heard. You may not feel recognized. And figuring out when you say to your team, I'm not going to work with you anymore if you're not listening to me, or I need to do something different so that you're giving me options and things to think about, right? How we empower ourselves to be able to do that. And I'm kind of preaching to the choir here because you're all here in this room, right? And you're all taking in that information. So always thinking about who else do we need to reach out to? How do we engage the folks who maybe aren't, part of the community actively right now is really important. So, learn, write down, bring questions. I always tell folks when you're going into any doctor's visit, get that question with the thing that's most on your mind, get it out there. It's something like the first 11 seconds. Because we get very short times with our teams, right? Get it out there right away to say, before I leave the room today, I want to make sure that you've answered this question for me, or that we've covered this topic, so that things don't get lost. And it's really, there's a fine art, right, to kind of getting through those visits. And like I said, that's where the advocacy piece comes in, right? All of your questions, and here this week, right? All of your questions, all of us that are researchers and that are clinicians are going, oh, wait a minute, this is something we need to pay more attention to. The other thing that families really rely on, right, is the structures they create that work for them, right? That can be everything from schedules and med boxes, and when your team comes in and how your team communicates and how that information gets shared, what you do when you're going somewhere, what you do when you're packing your child off to go to school or ABA, or what you're doing when you pack up and come on a trip like this, right? Do I have a volunteer to tell me what it was like getting ready to come here? What was it like? Chaos? Right, but you brought order to the chaos somehow, and sort of thought about, okay, what do we need to bring with us? What do we need to do? What contingencies do we need to be prepared for? Right? What if the kids are tired or not feeling well, or something happens? How are we going to deal with that? Right? All of that has to happen. Kudos to all of you for managing that every day. You do it every day, and then it takes it up another level, right? When you're going out in the world, and really thinking about. When you need help, asking for it, being really specific. This is what I need. I need someone to pick up my other child. I need someone to, prep one meal for me a week because we come home late from a therapy that night. Whatever it may be, to be able to say to each other within the family, but also to say to the aunts and the uncles and the neighbors and the friends who may be wonderful helpers, but they don't know unless we give them some specifics. Right? We can't, you sort of want I want someone just to hug me and support me, and that's important too. But we have to be able to not be telepathic, right? We have to be able to say, this is what I need this month, this year in my child's life, this is what I need. And to ask for it so that then we can create those systems that work. And, you know, creating habits that work for us. We're going to talk a little more later this afternoon. If you come back to us in the late afternoon around 3, we're going to be talking about a little bit about self-care and peer support and thinking about this idea of how do we create habits. And we're not just talking about creating habits of like, okay, how do I manage my child's needs during the day, but also how you take care of yourselves as parents, right? That's also a way of setting up good habits that give you a chance to decompress and to cope and to de-stress, like all of those things that I know sometimes feel impossible, but we want to think about. Right. So I don't even want to make a guess, right, at what typical days are like and all the things that people are juggling. But this was just what has struck me from conversations, right? All the things that folks are managing on a day-to-day basis. And there are lots of things you can do, right? There are lots of really helpful techniques and apps and things that you can utilize that will, you know, maybe, and I'm sure there are lots of conversations going on, and I was watching them happen yesterday. You all are sharing ideas with each other about, oh, this is what I do. This is what I do. This is how we manage. That's vitally important. And, you know, being prepared for the expected and the daily, and also being prepared for the unexpected. This is one of my favorite things that I've learned in working with families. And it seems to me now sort of obvious. Of course we do this. As parents, we do this no matter what, right? On one hand, we're really trying to set high expectations, get our kids as far as they can go in whatever way that may mean. You know, we think about what's the next task or the next developmental goal that we're trying to reach, right? We're always moving towards that next step, whatever it may be. And that's important, right? And what are the strengths that we have to help us get us there? And who are the resources we have to get us there? So that's really important. But at the same time, we also need to protect our kids, know when we say, no, these are things that we need schools and healthcare providers to provide for us. There are times that we need to say, no, there are things we can't do. There are things that don't work for us, and to kind of put up that wall and to protect our kids in that way. So, you know, and to protect our whole family, right? How do you think about your spouse, your partner, your other sibs in the house, right? What are you doing? I'm very excited to hear. I know we have a sibling speaker coming up this morning. I think that's incredibly important, right? How do we think about the other children in our households? You know, how do we help make the others around us aware of what's going on so that, right, we get what we need at the same time. And we're constantly adapting and figuring out, how do we change? What do we need to do to grow and to, you know, keep our kids moving forward? But at the same time, where do we need to say, no, you need to accommodate us. You need to accommodate the challenges that this condition is bringing. And these are the things that we need provided for us, right? So you're not always the ones doing the bending, right? Hopefully other folks are doing some bending on your behalf to make all of that happen. We're going to talk about this more this afternoon, but there is so much support out there, right? There are all kinds of peer support, obviously, that you found here and what your advocacy organizations have available online. There are lots of other resources out there, both in person and online, for that kind of thing. We're going to talk a little bit about sort of mindfulness and self-care and how we take care of ourselves, but also to know that reaching out for support, there is a broad swath of professional support out there for individuals, for families, for couples, all of that, and thinking about what it is you need and not being afraid to ask for it, and not being afraid to go back to your medical team and say, I don't even know where to start, or even your insurance company, your behavioral health phone number, the back of your insurance card. I don't know what we need exactly, but I know I need some other support. We're really struggling at this moment, and not being afraid to ask for that is really crucial. The other thing that is wonderful, and it is wonderful about meetings like these, right, is connecting with each other. Is anybody at a table that they are with someone they just met this week? Awesome. Terrific. right? Connecting with each other, connecting with other people that share your experience, quite frankly, is more important to me than anything you might do with professionals like me and Brett and Haley. Right? Talking with each other and connecting with each other, there is so much that you're going to learn, and there's so much you're going to see. And one thing that I've really noticed over the years is that as you get, especially as you get to know each other and you've seen each other perhaps, over a span of years at different conferences, right? You're going to keep notes. You're going to kind of compare and see what other people are going through, how it compares to what you and your child are going through, and sort of be witnesses for each other's journeys. And also maybe go, well, I see they've made these choices and they're here, and I've made these choices and we're here. What do we learn from that? And that's really natural. There's no shame. There's no embarrassment in doing that, right? That you're kind of learning from one another what this journey might look like over time. And hopefully you get to see and celebrate a lot of successes. And you also get to support each other when those successes are hard to maintain, or when kids are having a really hard time, right? Or when there are losses in the community. And that's part of the reality of many of these diseases, right? What's really lovely too is that over time, you may be in a moment of seeking help and support, or you may be in a moment of saying, oh, I can support and mentor someone else. I can give that advice. I can be that arm for someone else. And it's okay to move in and out of that. You are not glued to one role, right? You have not like, okay, I've climbed the ladder. Now I feel like a veteran. Now it's my job to always help other people. It's okay for you to go, you know what? I'm overwhelmed. I need to step back, or I need to ask for support now. Right? So please know that all of those roles are fluid, because as your child is growing up, going from, pre-K, toddlerhood, middle school age, teenage, young adulthood, the needs are going to be different, and your needs are going to be different as a parent. And so it is absolutely okay to sort of move around in what role you're playing within your own communities, within these support structures. One of the things that's really interesting, right, is thinking about who do you share what with, right? Are there things that you share within these communities that you share when you're online in, say, support groups and Facebook groups and things like that with these groups? And are there things that you share in other parts of your community? And what's the impact of that? Right? And how do people react to that? And where do you get your support? And it's really interesting to think about, right, what we share, what venues we share things in, how private they are, how public they are, right? And it's something that's worth thinking about over time, in terms of, and we have probably do we have any active bloggers in the room, or people who have sort of told their story for either awareness raising or fundraising? Yes? Was that a big decision to make, or it was just like, no, this is what I need to do? Yeah, you need to tell that story, right? So, using that, there's so many ways to do that, to both help yourself, help your family, but also help the communities around you. So, I think that choice about being public is an interesting one to make. And certainly, both thank goodness and oh my gosh, when it comes to the internet, right? We can learn so much from each other, but we also, have to decide what we share and not. I want you all to know my email is at the end of this, and I'm happy to talk to all of you, but I am completely Facebook findable. All the communities that I work with, I'm like, I'm as transparent as I can be, because I want to get to know all of you and I want to hear your stories. So, please know that we all have to kind of make those decisions, right, about our public and private persona. One of the other things, let's see, can I do this? Oh, there we go. We have bullet points. How exciting. One of the things that has always struck me as so meaningful when I talk to families, right, is the philosophy with which you all move forward. And you may not even realize that you have one, right? But thinking about either we've adapted our lives to fit the needs of our affected child, and our affected family member, and whatever we need to do, that's what that's what dictates what we do. I've had other families talk to me about how we're going to live our lives no matter what, and we're going to find a way to make it fit. Right. And it's subtly different, and there is no right in that. Either one of those approaches absolutely works. But that idea of, are we adjusting what we do to fit the illness? Or are we saying, we're going to mold this into something that lets us still have our children out in the world experiencing it in the best way that they possibly can. And our siblings and all our other folks too, being able to live as fully as possible. Right? So it's an interesting, right? And we bring our faith, we bring our beliefs from our own childhood, our own upbringing about how life's supposed to be. We bring expectations, right? When you're having a baby or you're thinking about having a family, right? You have all these expectations. We have to change those quite substantially, right? When we have a child with a health condition or a disability. So, you know, and is it some families are like, we are in this fight. We are going to knock down every barrier that comes ahead of us, and we're going to seek out every treatment. We're going to do everything we can do. Other folks are like, we're just hanging on to stay stable and stay together and, you know, have our heads in one place. And that's all okay, right? There are different styles of approaching your daily lives that, you know, that all are important, you know, or what can I learn out of this? And many of you have talked about how, although this was not the life you may have expected, the things you've learned and grown from and the connections you've made because of sort of being through that, going through that process. And we only have today, right? Every day is unique. And so that idea of how do we take that moment, right? How do we take that moment, even if we're going out for a walk on our block, or we're going to a medical appointment and hey, we go to the zoo afterwards, whatever it is that gives us a moment with our children, with our families, with a sense of, you know, peace and a deep breath for a few moments, right? That may be some of the most important stuff that we can do, is to give ourselves a little bit of time to say, right here, right now, you are all here in this room together. Right. And that is amazing. And that is wonderful. So being able to sort of take a step back and sort of appreciate that, because we may not know, right, what the future holds. And we may have had a very difficult struggle behind us getting to a point of, okay, we know what we're dealing with. We have a diagnosis, we have some plans, we have some ideas of how we're moving forward, but just in this moment, right, we're here, right now. I put some resources together for you. And like I said, you can grab this down off the agenda anytime while we're here today. There are some great things out there from, I've done a lot of work with Global Genes. This is a wonderful, parenting children with health issues is really it's a little bit old now. It's probably about 10 years old, but still available on Amazon. But a wonderful book that I loved about sort of making decisions as a parent around taking care of your child and your siblings and the siblings in the household. I know you have some transition related and becoming young adults and many challenges around legal issues that I think are also going to be discussed today. Parenting children with special needs is a great place to start. It may be something you're already familiar with. The advocacy piece too, there's lots of legal issues, especially as your kids are becoming, right, moving to be 16, 18, 21. What are the different decisions that have to be made? And it's its own unique and important area that you need to become knowledgeable about over time. So, and I've done a lot of work with that transition from pediatric care to adult care. Right? So what happens? Are you changing neurologists? Are you changing other specialists as your child becomes an adult? Some teams manage to maintain and keep that same healthcare team going. But for many people, there's a switch that happens between 18 and 21, and kind of knowing and asking your team ahead of time, what do you need to know? And at the same time that those systems are changing, your child, right, developmentally, what's ever going on for them at that moment in time, right? What are their needs at that moment in time? Something else I want to promote later on today. What's our time frame, Brett? 2 o'clock, I think. for our bodies and boundaries talk, right? So that's also talking about what's going on as your kids are growing up, how we're keeping them safe, how they're thinking about their physical bodies. Something else important to talk about as they're getting older. Please come and join us for that session as well, so we can kind of keep talking about that, right? But all of these changes are constant. And this is, part of your task as parents, right? Is to keep on top of that, as well as keeping on top of all the day-to-day pieces. I have no idea what time it is. Are we good? Are we right on time? All right, we're sending you off to a lot of things today, and I'm done. I know I threw a lot at you. I hope it will all percolate. We are around all day to keep having these conversations, either in sessions or one-on-one. Please just grab us and share with us. If you have a couple last minute questions, please raise them now, or we'll keep talking in the course of the morning. Thank you, everybody. See you around.